You are not weak. You're just not stoic yet. You are not broken. You are not deficient. You are not failing at life because you feel overwhelmed, reactive, or uncertain. What you are experiencing is not weakness of character, but a lack of training in how to meet the world as it actually is. Modern life offers no instruction in inner discipline. It rewards speed over reflection, expression over restraint, and reaction over judgment. From morning to night, you are exposed to noise, urgency, comparison, and pressure. You are expected to care deeply about things you cannot control, to respond instantly to provocation, and to measure your worth through approval that shifts by the hour. In such conditions, anxiety is not an anomaly. It is the predictable result. Stoicism begins with a sober observation. Most human suffering is not caused by events themselves, but by the judgments we attach to them. This is not comforting language. It does not excuse injustice or deny pain. It simply restores responsibility to where it belongs, not over the world, but over your own mind. When you feel anger rising, fear tightening your chest, or resentment lingering long after an event has passed, this is not proof that you are weak. It is evidence that impressions are being accepted without examination. Stoicism does not ask you to become emotionless. It asks you to become precise, to pause before agreeing that something is unbearable, humiliating, or catastrophic. The Stoic path is not about becoming superior to others. It is about becoming less ruled by what does not belong to you. Calm is not a personality trait. It is a skill. Resilience is not something you are born with. It is something you practice. This is not a promise of ease. It is an invitation to clarity, and clarity, once learned, changes how everything is carried. The world you are moving through was not designed for steadiness. It was designed for reaction. Every system you interact with profits from your attention being unsettled, your emotions stirred, your sense of urgency heightened. News feeds reward outrage. Social platforms reward comparison. Work culture rewards constant availability. None of this is accidental, and none of it is neutral. Stoic philosophy begins by naming this problem without exaggeration. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. In modern terms, this means that whatever you repeatedly consume, respond to, and dwell on quietly reshapes your inner posture. When your days are filled with agitation, conflict, and endless opinion, your inner life mirrors that instability. You begin to feel as though calm is unnatural, even suspicious. What most people call weakness is often nothing more than exhaustion from misdirected attention. You are asked to care deeply about matters you cannot influence, and to neglect the few things you can. Stoicism reverses this orientation. It does not promise control over outcomes. It demands discipline over judgment. Epictetus made this distinction central. Some things are up to us, and some things are not. This idea is repeated so often that it risks becoming decorative, but its implications are severe. Your opinions, intentions, and actions are yours. The behavior of others, the state of the economy, public opinion, and the past are not. Yet most anxiety comes from attempting to manage what was never yours to begin with. Consider how often your mood is altered by a message, a comment, a glance, or a headline. In each case, something external makes a claim on your inner state, and you accept it without resistance. Stoicism does not ask you to deny what happened. It asks you to deny it authority over your character. The Stoics understood impressions as the first spark of emotion. An impression arrives uninvited. an insult, a loss, a threat, a temptation. You do not control its arrival. What you do control is whether you give it assent. Most people collapse these two steps into one. They feel and immediately believe. They react and then justify. This is where training begins, not in suppressing emotion, but in slowing agreement. Anger says something is unjust and must be corrected now. Fear says something is dangerous and must be avoided at all cost. Desire says something is necessary for your happiness. Stoicism asks you to interrogate these claims before acting on them. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. This was not a dismissal of real hardship. It was an observation about how quickly the mind compounds pain. A single setback becomes a story about failure. A single rejection becomes a verdict on worth. A single uncertainty becomes a future catastrophe. None of this is imposed by the event itself. It is constructed internally. Modern life accelerates this process. You are rarely given time to sit with an impression before being pushed toward reaction. Silence feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels unproductive. Yet without space, judgment cannot mature. You become reactive, not because you are impulsive by nature, but because you are trained to be. Stoicism reclaims that space. It insists that between stimulus and response, there is room for choice. That room may be small at first, but it exists. And in that space, character is formed. Social pressure is one of the strongest forces acting on the modern mind. Approval is quantified. Disapproval is public. The fear of being ignored or misunderstood quietly shapes behavior. You begin to say what is expected rather than what is true. You begin to value appearing good over being good. The Stoics regarded reputation as a preferred indifferent. It may be pleasant to have, but it is not essential, and it is not reliable. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that those who praise you today may condemn you tomorrow, and that both judgments are equally outside your control. To live according to virtue is to accept that misunderstanding is often the cost of integrity. Much of what people call anxiety is the tension between who they are and who they feel pressured to present. Maintaining an image requires constant vigilance. Stoicism offers relief not by improving the image, but by loosening its grip. When your sense of worth is grounded in your own conduct rather than external validation, social pressure loses much of its force. This does not make you indifferent to others. It makes you less dependent on their reactions. You can act with consideration without being ruled by approval. You can accept criticism without collapse. You can endure being overlooked without resentment. Anger deserves special attention because it often disguises itself as strength. Anger feels decisive. It feels justified. It feels like self-respect. Yet the Stoics saw anger as a temporary madness, a state in which reason abdicates authority. When you are angry, you are not more powerful, you are less governed. Anger arises when expectations collide with reality. You believe something should not have happened, and that belief demands correction. Sometimes correction is necessary. Often it is not within your power. Stoicism does not forbid action. It forbids blind reaction. A disciplined response may still be firm. It may still be firm. It may still be full of boundaries or consequences. The difference is that it is guided by reason rather than impulse. You act because it is appropriate, not because you are inflamed. Fear operates similarly. Fear projects future harm and demands avoidance. Some fears are rational. Many are anticipatory rehearsals for events that may never occur. The Stoics trained themselves to face this directly by contemplating adversity in advance, not to become pessimistic, but to reduce surprise. When difficulty arrives, it feels familiar rather than catastrophic. This practice was not about emotional numbing. It was about reducing dependence on favorable conditions. If your peace depends on everything going well, peace will be rare. If it depends on your ability to respond well, peace becomes portable. Modern culture treats comfort as a right and discomfort as a failure. Stoicism treats discomfort as information. It reveals attachments. It shows where desire has exceeded reason. It marks areas where resilience is undeveloped. You are not weak because discomfort unsettles you. You are untrained. Training does not remove difficulty. It changes your relationship to it. The first movement of Stoic practice is therefore diagnostic. It asks you to notice where your energy is spent, what repeatedly disturbs you, in which judgments you rarely question. This is not an exercise in self-blame. It is an inventory. Until you see clearly how much of your suffering comes from misplaced control and unexamined beliefs, no philosophy will help you. Stoicism begins not with answers, but with attention. Much of your daily strain comes from a quiet insistence that life should conform to your preferences. You may not state this belief openly, but it expresses itself through frustration, disappointment, and restlessness. You want certainty where none is promised. You want recognition to be fair. You want effort to guarantee results. You want others to behave reasonably. When these expectations fail, as they inevitably do, you experience it as personal injury. Stoicism does not remove desire, it disciplines it. Desire, when left unexamined, expands beyond what reality can sustain. You begin to demand outcomes rather than actions, guarantees rather than probabilities. Epictetus warned that if you desire things outside your control, you make yourself a slave. This is not metaphorical language. Psychological dependence functions exactly like captivity. Your mood becomes contingent. Your stability becomes conditional. Modern ambition intensifies this problem. You are encouraged to identify with achievements, status, and visibility. Work becomes identity. Success becomes proof of worth. Failure becomes a verdict. Under this framework, rest feels like guilt, and uncertainty feels like threat. Stoicism interrupts this pattern by separating who you are from what happens to you. The Stoic view of control is often misunderstood as passive acceptance. In reality, it is precise engagement. You apply effort where effort is effective. You withdraw emotional investment where it is wasted. This distinction is difficult because it runs against instinct. The instinct is to cling, to manage, to intervene endlessly. Stoicism teaches restraint not as withdrawal, but as efficiency. Consider how much of your mental energy is spent replaying conversations, anticipating conflicts, or worrying about how decisions will be judged. None of this alters outcomes. It only erodes attention. The Stoics recognize that the mind can be occupied without being productive, busy without being effective. Calm is not inactivity. It is focus without friction. Attachment is another source of quiet suffering. You attach not only to people and possessions, but to roles, identities, and narratives about how life should unfold. When these attachments are threatened, fear arises. When they are lost, grief intensifies. Stoicism does not forbid attachment, but it insists on clarity about its nature. Everything external is temporary. This is not pessimism, it is accuracy. Seneca advised enjoying what you have as though it were on loan. This perspective changes how loss is experienced. You still feel it, but you are not shocked by it. You are not outraged by reality. For behaving as it always has, grief becomes cleaner. It hurts, but it does not accuse the world. Ego complicates this further. Ego seeks not only comfort, but significance. It wants to matter, to be seen, to be affirmed. When ego drives behavior, even virtuous acts become fragile. You help others and then feel resentment if unrecognized. You work diligently and feel bitterness if overlooked. You speak truth and feel wounded if misunderstood. Stoicism asks a difficult question. Would you still act well if no one noticed, praised, or agreed with you? This is not a demand for invisibility. It is a test of motive. When your actions are aligned with your values rather than your image, they become steadier. You are less shaken by response, because response was never the goal. The desire to control others is another common trap. You want people to understand you, to behave rationally, to meet your expectations. When they do not, you experience irritation or disappointment. The Stoics were blunt on this point. Other people are not yours to command. Their judgments arise from their own impressions, histories, and limitations. To demand otherwise is to argue with nature. This does not mean tolerating injustice or abandoning boundaries. It means releasing the belief that you can engineer agreement or moral clarity in others. You can speak, act, and withdraw. You cannot compel understanding. Accepting this reduces chronic frustration. You stop mistaking resistance for personal failure. Fear of the future occupies much of modern consciousness. Economic uncertainty, social instability, health concerns, and global events combine into a constant background hum of apprehension. Stoicism does not dismiss these concerns as imaginary. It reframes how they are carried. The future, by definition, is not accessible to action. Preparation is possible. Worry is not. The Stoics distinguished between prudent foresight and anxious rumination. One clarifies options and strengthens capacity. The other rehearses helplessness. If your thinking does not lead to action within your control, it is likely draining rather than preparing you. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to meet events as they arrive, not as they are feared. This is a discipline of presence. You deal with what is in front of you, not with every possible version of what might come. This reduces the burden from infinite to manageable. Control over desire also extends to comfort and avoidance. Many people mistake Stoicism for austerity because it encourages tolerance of discomfort. In truth, it encourages independence from comfort. There is a difference. Comfort is pleasant. Dependence on comfort is destabilizing. When you require ease to function, difficulty becomes a crisis. By occasionally choosing voluntary discomfort, such as restraint, simplicity, or silence, the Stoics trained resilience. This was not self-punishment, it was inoculation. When hardship arrives uninvited, it feels less foreign. You have met discomfort before on your own terms. The modern world offers constant escape from discomfort. Distraction is immediate. Entertainment is endless. Yet, avoidance does not eliminate difficulty. It postpones it, often intensifying its return. Stoicism teaches endurance not as grim endurance, but as confidence in your capacity to withstand. At the center of this practice is a shift in identity. You stop defining yourself by outcomes, possessions, or recognition. You define yourself by how you respond. This is not a small adjustment. It is a reorientation of value. When something goes wrong, the Stoic question is not, why this happened to me, But how will I meet this? This does not deny emotion, it orders it. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. Many people resist this approach because it feels demanding. It removes excuses. It denies the comfort of blame. Stoicism does not tell you that you deserve better circumstances. It tells you that you are capable of better judgment. This is not harshness, it is respect for your agency. To say that your peace depends entirely on external conditions is to reduce you to a victim of circumstance. Stoicism restores dignity by insisting that your inner life is not owned by events. Part of this dignity involves accepting limits. You cannot do everything. You cannot do everything. You cannot do everything. You cannot do everything. You cannot secure every outcome. The attempt to do so leads to chronic tension. Letting go of impossible standards is not lowering yourself. It is aligning with reality. When desire is disciplined, attachment clarified, and control properly located, a different form of strength emerges. It is quieter. It does not announce itself. It is the strength to remain composed without needing to dominate, impress, or escape. This strength is not dramatic. It is consistent, and consistency, over time, reshapes how life is experienced. There comes a point where philosophy can no longer remain abstract. Pain arrives. Loss interrupts routine. Injustice appears without explanation. Bodies weaken. People leave. Plans collapse. At this point, many belief systems retreat into comfort language or denial. Stoicism does neither. It looks directly at what cannot be softened. The Stoics accepted suffering as part of the human condition, not as punishment, not as exception, but as fact. This acceptance was not resignation, it was clarity. When you stop demanding that life be free of hardship, hardship loses some of its power to humiliate you. You still feel pain. You simply stop treating it as evidence that something has gone wrong with existence itself. Injustice is one of the hardest realities to face. Good people suffer. Careless people succeed. Effort is not always rewarded. Integrity is not always recognized. Stoicism does not promise fairness from the world. It promises coherence within yourself. You cannot control whether justice prevails in every case. You can control whether injustice turns you bitter, cruel, or dishonest. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the best revenge is not to become like the wrongdoer. This is not moral posturing. It is psychological self-preservation. When you allow resentment to shape your character, harm spreads inward. You become governed by the very thing you oppose. Stoicism insists that your character is not collateral damage in someone else's failure. Loss strips away illusions quickly. Whether it is the loss of a person, health, opportunity, or identity, it reveals how much of your stability was borrowed. Stoicism does not ask you to grieve less. It asks you to grieve honestly, to mourn without self-pity, to feel pain without turning it into a story of personal injustice. Grief hurts because attachment was real. Stoicism does not deny this. It simply reminds you that impermanence was always part of the agreement. Nothing you love is exempt from change. This knowledge does not make love shallow. It makes it lucid. Mortality sits at the center of Stoic thought, not as obsession, but as orientation. Death clarifies priorities. When you remember that time is finite, trivial anxieties lose authority. Petty conflicts shrink. Delayed courage becomes less acceptable. You stop postponing integrity. The Stoics practiced remembering death not to become morbid, but to become precise. You do not have endless time to become the person you respect. You do not have unlimited chances to act with courage, restraint, or kindness. This awareness sharpens attention. Fear of death often disguises fear of unfinished living. Regret arises not from dying, but from having avoided responsibility while alive. Stoicism addresses this by shifting focus from duration to quality. A good life is not measured by length, but by alignment between values and actions. Pain, when it comes, tests philosophy. Stoicism does not promise that pain will be painless. It promises that pain does not have to corrupt you. You may be weakened physically. You do not have to become smaller morally. This distinction matters. Many people endure hardship only to emerge resentful, closed, or cynical. Stoicism offers a different outcome. You may be altered, but not degraded. You may be scarred, but not distorted. The practice here is simple and difficult. When hardship arrives, you ask what remains within your power. Often, it is very little. A choice of attitude, a refusal to lie, a commitment to act with dignity. These may seem small. They are not. They are the final territory of freedom. As you age, certain ambitions lose urgency. External validation becomes less nourishing. You begin to care more about coherence than recognition. Stoicism aligns naturally with this shift. It values steadiness over applause, substance over appearance. This philosophy does not promise happiness as a constant emotional state. It offers something quieter and more durable: equanimity. The ability to remain upright when circumstances tilt. The ability to accept pleasure without clinging and hardship without collapse. You are not weak because life weighs on you. Life weighs on everyone. The difference lies in preparation. Stoicism is not a shield against difficulty. It is training for endurance. This training is never complete. Each day presents new impressions, new tests, new chances to practice restraint or surrender it. Progress is uneven. Failure is expected. What matters is returning to judgment rather than reaction. You are not asked to withdraw from the world. You are asked to meet it without confusion about what belongs to you. Your actions, your intentions, your character, everything else is contingent. If you continue, slowly and without urgency, something shifts. You become harder to provoke and easier to trust, less impressed by noise, less threatened by uncertainty, more consistent in conduct. This is not a transformation others will necessarily notice.